Breaking: major fraud discovered in Alabama, and more is pissed, by Liberty Bell for veteranaf.com. When it comes to elections, crooked politicians will do whatever it takes to win. During the presidential election last year, we constantly heard incidents of voter fraud taking place, where Hillary voters were allegedly casting ballots multiple times and buses of people were being transported into key swing states, counties, in order to throw the vote. With Democrats now celebrating Doug Jones's win, Republican Roy Moore is refusing to concede after evidence of voter fraud is now being reported. Due to massive voter fraud that exists, being able to go back and recount digital votes is a very serious step to preserving the integrity of elections. But in a shocking 11th hour, the Alabama Supreme Court ruled that counties in Alabama can destroy voting records in the Roy Moore-Doug Jones race, going against the long-standing rule that the records would be preserved. Essentially, any criminal evidence of people voting multiple times, or illegals or non-residents casting votes, is now forever destroyed, TechCrunch reports. Following an 11th hour order instructing voting officials in Alabama to keep the digital ballots generated in Tuesday's controversial Senate election, the state Supreme Court has issued a stay to block that decision. The order to preserve the records was issued by the Montgomery County Circuit Court on Monday afternoon, less than 24 hours before voting was set to begin. And the stay will effectively nullify that order that was issued late Monday night. All counties employing digital ballot scanners in the December 12, 2017 election are hereby ordered to set their voting machines to save all processed images in order to preserve all digital ballot images, the Montgomery County order stated. The order came just hours before the votes were counted in the Moore-Jones race. Democrat Doug Jones took a commanding lead in the Senate race Tuesday night, as it became clear that Mobile County was going to be the last county to come in. Mobile County is a heavily pro-Jones area, tabulated its ballots for slower than the Moore-led red counties elsewhere in the states. But this is just the beginning of the disgusting evidence emerging that there was shady things going on. Here's just a few of the alarming things that's currently raising eyebrows. Number one, fake narrative about voter suppression. It was widely predicted that blacks in Alabama would determine the outcome of the race. When the liberal media began to realize that it would be an incredibly tight race, where we saw Moore and Jones separated by less than 1% for several hours, liberals immediately began to push the false narrative that blacks were being blocked from the polling places. One of the trending stories was from fake liberal website Verified Politics, was a viral story called "Something Incredibly Shady is Happening in Alabama Right Now," where they made the ridiculous claim that blacks were being prevented from voting. In the article, the website asserted that white supremacy, quote, was preventing black citizens from being able to take to the polls. That no doubt got the black populace fired up just in time to cast their votes for Jones before the race ended. Here's a short excerpt of their ridiculous story where they claim that white supremacists, quote, were requiring poor blacks from being able to vote because they were required to show an ID. Alabama has a long history of suppressing the votes dating back at least to 1901, when the state passed a new constitution whose main purpose was to deny African Americans the right to vote, they whined. In 2011, the Republican-controlled state legislature passed a law that all voters must have a photo ID, which immediately disenfranchised many rural and poor blacks. 2. Liberals' army of felons. Liberals frequently use the backing of criminals to bolster their agenda, which is why they fight so hard to keep Muslim immigrants and Mexican illegals in our country. The Alabama Senate race was no different, as Breitbart exposed how George Soros and infamous race baiter Al Sharpton had their grubby talons all over this race right from the beginning, where the duo registered an army, quote, of convicted felons across Alabama to help bolster support for Jones. An organization partnered with a George Soros finance group and led by radical leftists who is the half-brother of the infamous controversial Reverend Al Sharpton, that has been diligently working over the past few weeks to register convicted felons across Alabama, Breitbart began. They went on. The aim of the effort has been to get as many felons as possible on the roster before last Monday, the deadline to register in order to vote in Alabama's December 12th Senate special election that pits Republican Roy Moore against Democrat challenger Doug Jones. The man spearheading the campaign has stated outright that his effort is meant to ensure a Democratic victory in Alabama. The thousands of felons reportedly newly registered over the past few weeks were most likely not included in any recent polling on the Alabama Senate race, but put out by major firms. Jones himself is tied to some of the specific organizations associated with the drive to register felons here. Indeed, as Breitbart News first reported, Jones spearheaded a project for a massively Soros-financed legal activist group demanding full voting rights be given to felons released from prison, including those convicted of murder, rape, and other violent crimes. 3. Dark money from very questionable sources. Whenever you smell a rat, chances are George Soros is somewhere nearby lurking about. The infamous evil billionaire who turned his own neighbors into the Nazis in the 1940s is constantly gunning for the destruction of America, where he's a huge donor of crooked politicians like Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and rhino Republicans like John McCain. So it should come as no surprise that Soros, yet again, was at the helm causing chaos and trying to throw the election in Alabama via Breitbart. Politico reported on Monday that the George Soros-funded Priorities USA Action and Senator Chuck Schumer, Senator Majority PAC, are the dark money behind the Alabama Shell Group that has spent more than $4.1 million to defeat conservative Republican Roy Moore in Tuesday's Alabama U.S. Senate special election, in which he faces liberal Democrat Doug Jones. 4. Liberals behind the character assassination of Roy Moore. For weeks, there was an ongoing barrage of accusations made about Roy Moore, where he was even accused of pedophilia and going after several underage girls. One of Moore's accusers was Beverly Young Nelson, the ex-waitress who charged that Moore groped her when she was 16 and he was in his 30s, and used her high school yearbook bearing Moore's signature as, quote, proof that she knew him. Even though Nelson would be busted for plagiarizing the yearbook entry, liberals still use the woman's false testimony as a way to push the narrative that Moore was a sexual predator. There still has yet to be any evidence against Moore except the testimonies of these women who conveniently crawled out of the woodwork to share their stories right before the race. It was even discovered that George Soros was behind the hit research of Moore and encouraging these women to speak out against the Republican judge. Yesterday was an enormous hit to the Republican Party. Jones's victory will have significant consequences for Republicans on the national level. Democrats' goal now is to capture the last Senate seat up for grabs next year in order to gain the majority in the Senate. But again, Roy Moore is going to fight this because there's a lot of voter fraud going on. People were bussed in from different states. And just look at the judge wanting to throw out the ballots so they can't be traceable. You get it? But good that Moore put a court order to stop that because they wanted this like a done deal without any questions. But he pulled a Hillary. Good for him, and I'm happy about it. Why should he give it up? We know this is basically a Republican state. How did it happen? The votes don't add up. I got from other sources the numbers are not adding up the right way. They didn't even tally in the military votes for him. I mean, they just wanted this done, and by any means possible, they wanted Jones to get in with their corruption. See, because Republicans basically go on they're more on the up and up. The right tends to go the right way. The left, they play dirty. They really do. And again, we see Soros in the background. What else do you need to know? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And again, thank you so much for watching.